appreciate you joining me today and talking about your experience with CoTranslator AI, especially with the gate workflow as well, and then all the other innovations that you've added onto the tool. So maybe just introduce yourself briefly before we jump into the other stuff.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaloyan. I am from Bulgaria. I've been working as a translator and interpreter for about almost 20 years now. And I currently own a small boutique LSP based in Bulgaria, focused mostly on, serving the Bulgarian market. And my other, let's say, passion and, calling is journalism. I work for the Bulgarian news agency as well. I work in the English service directorate. We do the news about Bulgaria in English.
So are you going out and collecting news, or you're translating the news into English mainly?
Mostly it's translating. We have some leeway as to, for example, choosing events which other reporters will not cover. And then we can go and cover those. I've done a few myself and my colleagues also, but this is not the primary thing. The primary thing is just translating the news from the country, like statistical data, the weather, mountain hiking conditions, border traffic updates. These are some of the things, of course, also economy and statements by the president, by the prime minister, and so on. So it's a lot of output, which is repetitive because, for example, some of the stuff happens every day. So every day there's some statistics or some weather updates or whatever. And because we're talking about CoTranslator AI, now I'm moving towards that, but it's been
I'm,
very
I'm
helpful. Yeah.
I'm thinking if you're translating similar content from day to day, that having customized prompts for a specific document type uh, could be extremely efficient. I mean, if you did the weather yesterday and you put your translation into your anchor prompt for yesterday's weather, and then you update with today's weather, you probably almost get a perfect translation almost every time, do you not?
Yeah, that's exactly the case. I've been joking that I write weather updates with a single click because it's basically, well, so few keystrokes also, but very because we write those articles in a very formulaic way. They have to follow a certain pattern and certain language, and there are rules about how you actually write it. And so it's very scripted and structured, which is perfect for CoTranslator AI. You can just literally click a button and produce an article about the weather update. Just put in
So
the new information, put in the template, and then voila, I can generate about. This used to take me 20 minutes when I started. Now to properly do the weather article now it takes me 2 minutes, and I can just post it. And it's like in journalism, you have to be mindful of deadlines. So it's not just, I want to do the work faster so I can, go chill. It's also I have to deliver stuff under certain deadlines, and this helps me a lot. It relieves the pressure. And, and by the way, the output is excellent quality. Even sometimes I would forget about some of the formatting rules and so on, but CoTranslator AI doesn't forget because the anchor prompt has everything, is set as rules. Rarely makes any mistakes. I can use those articles basically off the bat. I can just copy paste them and do minimal changes.
and why wouldn't you be able to do that in another tool? I mean, if you're translating from Bulgarian into English, what would happen differently if you went through DeepL, for example, instead of the way you're doing it?
DeepL is an excellent tool, by the way. I don't want to say anything bad about it. It's an excellent tool, and I've been using it for many, many years. And I know a lot of colleagues also use it. Problem with DeepL is that it doesn't retain, formatting, and information is not structured. So basically, whatever you put in, it gives you the output, and it's mostly very okayish translation. But I need to reformat, I need to reword or restructure, I need to apply the rules that I need to apply. And DeepL is not very good at following instructions, or should I say almost none. I think they have a dictionary support, but that's it. And, I want to start, generate a text with like the lead. And if the lead is not, let's say, perfect in the Bulgarian article, I need to basically like write the lead properly and then give it to DeepL, and I have to write it in such a way that DeepL would output it in English in the same way, and languages are not the same. So yeah, I mean, I would be able to do this with DeepL, but it would take me, let's say, 5, 6 more times, and I would need to do a lot of work and a lot of mental strain to get the information as I want it to be, as I need it to be, to complete my task. Whereas
How,
with questions,
so,
yeah,
sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
yeah,
How many, well, I should say this. So it sounds like most of your articles are small, short articles. Do you do any long form translations when you use the tool, or is it mostly these shortish things that you're working on?
it's great also on long translations, although the workflow is a bit different. So, of course, on the long articles, the long form, you don't have, let's say, for example, it's an interview with someone, and of course, interviews are not the same. Sometimes even it's with the same person who gave a previous interview, but it's on a different topic. So you don't have that repetitiveness of tasks. Still, CoTranslator is excellent at following, first of all, even the formatting. So let's say I have an interview and I want to format it in a certain way. If I have to type the speaker and provide the so-called diarization of who asked what, and let's say there are multiple interviewees, I can set up CoTranslator to just format it however I want to in advance. And then, I translate the interview through CoTranslator, and then it also gives me not just the translation that I have to edit then, because obviously it's not completely ready. You don't just give the AI output and just you're done. You have a lot of work to do, but a lot of the work is done for you in advance. So, for example, you have the diarization complete in advance. Every speaker is like listed with their name or tags or abbreviations or whatever else you need to do. And then the text is pre-formatted, so I don't have to like copy, paste, cut, and so on. This lets me work in the same type of task. So I'm focusing on the language, I'm focusing on whether the quotes are correct, what was being said, is it translated correctly? This is one task that, translators are really good at. And I don't need to worry about formatting because formatting is already done for me. And to be honest, if I give good enough prompt and instructions, and maybe I have some speech from that person before I can even speak in their voice, I can instruct CoTranslator to translate using their voice, using predefined terms, names, which I can't do with the other tools. So let's say, for example, this guy's mentioning the public procurement agency many times. Like he talks about it all the time, and he says like the PPA, PPA, PPA. Then the DeepL tool would, because it doesn't do well with the abbreviations, it doesn't translate them consistently, unfortunately. I would need to go in everywhere and fix every mention of the public procurement agency, the abbreviation. And with CoTranslator, I don't need to do that. It's doing that for me and letting me focus on the important stuff.
Are you working in a CAT tool mainly, or are you mostly working in Word files?
Uh, I honestly don't know which prevails. I work with several different CAT tools. And also I work with basically just the Bulgarian news agency, content control software, which is not exactly a CAT tool. It's a little bit different because it's about journalism. So, but basically CoTranslator is the perfect overlay because whatever I need to do, whatever my workflow is, I can just work on top of that. And the copy paste function is extremely, extremely helpful. So I don't even need to like press Control plus C and Control plus V all the time because mostly, CoTranslator, especially if you set it up right, will just paste the output into your screen and you don't need to change screens Alt and Tab all the time. This is distracting, and even little distractions, when you do them 1,000 times a day, it adds up. So I don't need to Alt and Tab. I save like maybe about 1,000 seconds per day, which is not nothing. Even just with that.
It adds up exactly. So basically, what the news agency's work is in like a browser window, I guess, and so
Yeah.
you're cutting and back, pasting into text boxes and stuff.
Absolutely. But you can also use Word documents for that. And we don't use CAT tools in the news agency because it's usually the information is not a direct translation. We need to like follow certain journalism rules. Even if I have like a press release in Bulgarian and I'm translating it into English, I need to make it into an actual article. I can't just copy paste the press release and translate it and that's it. I need to add like some factual background and so on, which is not very good for a cat tool because the cat tool is looking for text consistency, and I'm adding stuff to the English text to explain the context to the readers, so it doesn't really work well with that. But in my other work, I use a lot of cat tools, and I have to say, sometimes these are some very weird and obscure cat tools, such as, for example, I used to work with Transit,
Mm.
which just for one client, and it's really, I mean, it's for me, it's non-intuitive. I guess when you take the time to learn it, it becomes intuitive, but it's very difficult to operate. And honestly, I use CoTranslator to just avoid using the functionalities of Transit and just use them in my workflow in the way that I'm used to work. I put in my glossary that the client provided. I didn't have to learn the cat tool shortcuts. I just used the cat tool to write and deliver the project, but everything that I needed to do a good translation, I did in CoTranslator, and this honestly is giving me, freedom because you were talking, Stephen, about freedom, and I think I completely agree there. You can use whatever cat tool, just you just buy. I know it sounds maybe bad, but you disregard the cat tool functionalities and you just use your workflow in CoTranslator the way that you used to, and any cat tool works. Honestly, as
Oh,
long as you can copy paste, you don't need to know the cat tool. You just like need to know a few things, how to confirm a segment, and then everything else you can do outside of it, even if you don't know it.
so basically, you're maintaining your glossary in your prompt instead of inside whatever, for example, the terms that the cat tool would have in its term base.
Yeah, although let's say, for example, when I use, we can mention specific names, I'm guessing, of software. When I use SDL Trados, for example, which is my primary cat tool for translation work, I use some of the functions there. For example, they have a very nice autocomplete feature of confirmed segments or confirmed parts of segments. So, for example, I type one letter and I press tab and then they complete the whole phrase.
Mm.
They have also like QA function, which I use. CoTranslatorAI also has a QA function. I use them actually in parallel. With the right prompt, you can actually combine, and improve the functionality of the cat tool even more.
Okay.
It's been a huge. So you don't need to disregard it, is what I'm saying. You just, if you know how to use the cat tool, you can use both, and you can choose.
Mm.
And sometimes, honestly, my co-translator is taking some time to process a segment, but I already have a, let's say, DeepL plugin installed, right? And
Mm.
it's instant. So I just press, the shortcut for using the DeepL output because it's good. I can see it. I can confirm it. Mm, and this works, but then some longer segments, I'm not going to use the DeepL, or I can maybe use both, like
Mm.
check some of the suggested versions from DeepL, which also helps. Like it just works. It adds to what I'm already doing well, and it adds to my success instead of taking it away or like distracting me.
Interesting. That's interesting. So when you're working in Trados, for example, do you follow my prototypical workflow where you actually export out to a bilingual file and process it in the bilingual file and then export it back in, or are you doing it generally right inside the cat tool segment by segment?
That depends on the text. If it's a lot of, let's say, context dependent text, I export because then I can work on multiple segments. And if you give CoTranslator just like, let's say, a word or two words, it might, get lost a little bit. It's obviously AI is better with context, like everything. And CoTranslator is very good for this because you can put in the dictionary support and everything and terminology, but still, sometimes if you just give it one word, it will not know how to translate it in that context. So then you can just export the bilingual file in the cat tool and select multiple cells. So then it gets the context that it needs to know what
Mm.
is what. But then, for example, sometimes I have long paragraphs of text and they're not very, let's say, connected, or they are loosely connected, but there's a lot of enough context in the single window. So then I don't even export the text. I just select it inside the window. Then I press my shortcuts. It pastes it back, and then I can edit it or do further. I can do, repeated actions with CoTranslator, either with the shortcuts or manually, like putting in, fixing stuff. But I can work directly in the cat tool without even exporting. Of
Okay.
course, it depends. It depends on the type of text. So if I have a lot of smaller segments where they need to be put together, I export and then longer texts, I don't need to. Sometimes I do, but like it really depends. That's the freedom you get, though. You can choose your own way to work. You can even
Absolutely.
change it.
Well, yeah, the flexibility it lets you do whichever way works best for your present situation. In terms of iteration, do you follow an iterative workflow process in general when you're, I mean, on a longer text, I should say. I mean, my prototypical workflow is you start with an anchor prompt and you translate some, and then you update your anchor prompt for the next part, adding some gold standard text in, and then continue on, and you keep curating that prompt so that as the document goes, it gets better. Does that describe your workflow too, or have you innovated your workflow in different directions?
I mean, that describes a lot of my workflows. This is the gold standard, the gate workflow, I believe, at least, is the standard that translators should use in the future. And I'm saying it very seriously, like I'm not just, saying it like because it's worked for me. I can see that with the tools and with AI becoming better, this is the way to go. This gives you the highest quality output with the, you know, with the minimum time inputs, because time is money, as you know full well. On some of my workflows, I even, let's say, longer documents, they would require different sections, would require different prompts. So let's say the GDPR section of a contract, which could be 2 pages. The prompts are quite different because all of a sudden you're introducing data processors and, like parties and confidentiality and so on, which is different from the other sections of the text. And then you get to the penalties, and the penalties are also like, a section of its own. Like I'm talking about here texts of hundreds and hundreds of pages, not just like, 2-pager. So yeah, you can definitely even like you get to different sections of the contract, and I have a GDPR prompt
Mm.
for when I get, because in Europe we have, GDPR. When I get to the GDPR section of a contract, I just merge my GDPR prompt with my, other anchor prompt for the particular text, and I have a pre-drafted GDPR prompt. So this really helps me because, and I can even ask CoTranslator to help me merge the segment, which is the best part. You can write and structure the prompts inside CoTranslator.
How,
And
how,
basically,
how do you do that? I mean, you ask it to write the prompt to
yeah,
merge it,
yeah,
or you take two chunks and
absolutely.
you just ask it to create a new prompt from that? What's the
I have a prompt writing prompt,
Yeah,
which
okay.
basically
That's
in
cool.
CoTranslator, which I, say, well, I need this prompt to be merged with this one to translate a particular text. And then it asks me, okay, paste text one, paste like prompt two, and then it creates another prompt. So basically, I build my prompts using CoTranslator and pre-prepared prompt. So you asked me earlier, I'm sorry if I'm going off
Oh, you're
off
not.
the kilt, but you asked me earlier how this is better than, let's say, DeepL. I can do you one better. How is it better than just using the ChatGPT interface? Because CoTranslator is using ChatGPT.
Right.
Well, the prompt libraries and the shortcuts are just a gem. And
Mm.
then I have my prompt writing prompt saved, and I know what the shortcut is, and I don't need to think about it. I don't need to write it. I don't need to find it in a library, and you don't need to like even look in like click and where was it and so on, because this takes it takes mental space. It requires mental load. I can just press my shortcut and put in my two texts, and here, voila, I have my GDPR prompt tailored to this particular contract.
Interesting. That is an innovation that I have not thought of. I mean, I have thought of having, AI help me to write my prompts, but the idea to actually have something specifically templated out so you can put in the text and I guess and have it assemble a new prompt. Yeah, well, that is definitely in the spirit of how we're designing the tool, is to create that kind of flexibility. That's really good. Um, so let's
By
see.
the way,
Go
so,
ahead.
yeah, so just before because we're moving on, but I just wanted to say something else. To get this prompt that writes prompts, I got the idea, from your scripted workflows. I thought, why can't I'm doing this, can't I just automate it? Because I do certain actions and I paste certain things and just, I feel this is a very important part of the message for everyone who's watching, that you can just, you're not stuck just with Steven's method is great. It's amazing. I've taken a lot of inspiration from it. I've adapted it to my own needs. And then you should not stop and just like, okay, Steven got it. And, that's everything that this instrument could do. It can do so much more. I really
Thank you.
believe that.
Thank you, Colin. Yeah, that is the goal. That's the dream. Is I want to put out this framework, these frameworks, and this tool, but then I really want the users to take that and build on it, because that's where we're going to find our value, isn't it? Because if it is cookie cutter, if it is something that I can teach you the 10 steps and you just employ those in your workflow straight away, then anybody can do that. But it's when we have our prompt library with prompts that are matched exactly to our projects and our languages and all that kind of stuff, that we have our intellectual property that makes us irreplaceable. So that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank
I have something to add here also. I know I'm sorry, I keep
No,
interrupting you
you're not.
before you ask me a question, but
This
this
is
is where I just,
Cole, and this is long form content, so we'll
oh,
just
okay.
talk until we get through it all. It's no problem.
Okay, so I've been thinking about competition in the sector. Like, if anyone can use ChatGPT to translate, what makes a translator a translator? How are you being a better professional than anyone else who can use the tools? Because ChatGPT is very good at translating some stuff, especially the simpler stuff. And then how do you stand out? If everybody's using ChatGPT as a baseline, the baseline is pretty good already. Yes, it's not amazing. It's not like it sometimes creates drivel and so on. And then you have to, like, with your knowledge and your being subject matter expert, you add a lot of value. But I feel there's one more area where the real professional translators can stand out, and this is the way that the work is structured, because anyone can start using ChatGPT to translate, but not anyone can create, this workflow that you've created. Not anyone can do like a prompt which helps them make other prompts, and not everyone can just, be also on top of that subject matter expert and linguist. And so it's a lot of things, and actually you're protecting your competitive advantage, because clients are always asking, why can't I just translate this using ChatGPT? And I had a lawyer tell me, well, I already submit documents to the court that I've translated with ChatGPT. Why am I going to pay you? Because it's good enough for the court. And I basically, you can always like start, complaining that, AI is taking our jobs and so on, which is true, but also not very productive. Like, I need to live in the reality of the whole thing, and I need to bring value. And part of the value that I bring is that I have a process that I can use to do something really, really effectively. And yes, I maybe have to lower my rates because there is pressure on rates and so on. Everybody knows what the situation on the market is. But then, if I have this competitive advantage, I can work on lower rates and still deliver, good enough work. Sometimes good enough work is all the client needs. Sometimes they just have to have something to submit it. And, it's not everything is a complicated marketing text in our industry. Sometimes you just have to be good enough and quick enough. And, if you have this advantage, then you can definitely outperform in terms of quality and speed people who just log on to ChatGPT and say, translate this. This is our value. I believe this is where the true professional translators of the future are going to find a lot of value. And if you're not finding it, then you should think about how you could do that. That's what I believe, at least. Because,
Yeah.
everything else is, I wish this technology didn't exist. Some people would say it's not what I would say, but I've seen some people and understand the arguments, but it does exist. It is here. So what do we do about it?
Yeah, exactly. No, you're a kin spirit with me. I mean, there are. I mean, it's a scary time to be a translator. There's no question about it. But at the same time, uh, we have these many tools and these many things we can do, and we can move ahead. So a couple more questions. Okay, actually, I did have one more question that's not exactly in the flow, but I am curious. You know, Bulgarian and English are not, Bulgarian is not one of the most common languages in the world. And Korean and English are also, my language pair is probably not in the top level either. And I find that with my language pair, the quality is excellent. But I hear people say that, well, the quality goes down as the size of the data that went into the LLM decreases. What's your experience with the quality of the translation between Bulgarian and other languages?
I can answer chronologically. So it wasn't very good in the beginning, especially back in 2023 and 2024. It was not amazing. It was actually,
Oh,
it really was not great.
oh,
And since the '03 update, it's been steadily climbing up. With 4.1, which I'm currently using as the default, I even prefer it to 5 for Bulgarian in particular. I've tested and done benchmarks. I can safely say that it outperforms DeepL on every metric, even if DeepL, you know, it's it's quite good in Bulgarian actually. DeepL is very good, especially on European like types of European bureaucracy text, like European Commission and stuff. It's trained on that. And there's also a tool by the European Commission for automated translation of texts. And I found that 4.1, the model 4.1, consistently outperforms both of those with the right prompts. Without the right
mm,
prompts, it doesn't, of course. But with the right prompts, it outperforms them easily, and it is actually, I've found that in certain cases where I have a difficulty or not enough time to write my prompts and so on, I can just use the DeepL output and then improve on the DeepL output using CoTranslator.
okay.
Or maybe the client doesn't have enough money and they just want like something just to, because I run an LSP, so I have to go where my clients are. And my clients are sometimes saying, well, I have very little money, but I need this like to submit for whatever. It's just a placeholder document. And they said we translate it with Google Translate and it writes a lot of nonsense, but that's, they just need a placeholder. And I tell them like, look, I can give you very, very possible, improved DeepL output translation with very low cost and very high, very good turnaround time. So you can submit it like a huge document today and have it by tomorrow.
Mm,
And then I
mm.
use, I write my prompts carefully. I use CoTranslator AI to just improve the DeepL output. And sometimes that's what the clients want. It's not always, this is not how I would like to work. It's not how I started working. It was like all about quality and meeting the deadlines and so on, like, working under pressure, knowing a lot of stuff. But the market is changing, the needs of the customers are changing, and I have to just follow my market. I cannot go against the market because if I don't, then somebody else will.
Absolutely. No, we definitely have to be flexible and adjust. Um, okay, let's see a couple other questions I had. You know, besides the one you talked about, the prompt for writing prompts, I'd really be interested in knowing some of the other use cases beyond just translation, because what I have found in my experience is, you know, I envisioned this tool that would be great for tens of thousands of different use cases, at least let's just say dozens of use cases for an individual.
It's
And
Swiss knife of tools, Stephen.
I'm sorry?
It's the Swiss knife of tools.
Yeah, it's a Swiss knife of tools. But see, here's what's happened though, is that the translation has become clearly the core workflow. It's just so powerful in this one workflow that it's easy to get overshadowed with all the other things that the tool can do, or even that the AI can do specifically. So, you mentioned something about let's see, where was it? You said you have where was it? Hold on. Well, can you talk about some of the other use cases that you're using CoTranslator AI on besides translation specifically, and even moving beyond the one where you have a prompt to write your own prompts?
Sure. Yeah. Just text formatting. Let's say you have a job where you don't need to translate, but you just need to reformat something. In the same language even. It's not, I mean, I can just write whatever prompt I like, split the text into paragraphs. I can use, this is something that I've been using. So before I found CoTranslator and before I found some of the interesting uses, when you translate personal documents, because we are a small market and we need to do a lot of things to survive and to, hopefully thrive at some point, you translate a lot of birth certificates and so on. And so the workflow was you give it to somebody who would use, let's say, the industry standards like PDF Pro or Abifine Reader, and then they would just fastidiously just copy and paste and recognize and recreate the document from the, let's say, image to the text processed file. And this used to take a lot of time, and I had to pay an extra person, and there was an extra person in the workflow, so they had to have their own deadlines, managing different things. And it was not great because sometimes they would make a mistake, and then you would still need to, check the text anyway. So now instead, what I've started to do is I use my Abifine reader and, the screenshot reading function of ChatGPT in the user window because CotranslatorAI doesn't have image reading capabilities. And I take the information from those documents, let's say diplomas or ID cards, birth certificates, obviously, masking the personal identification numbers, all the personal information is masked. But then if you have to put this in by hand anyway because you cannot rely on the tool always getting it right. But then you can take all the other text and you just have it like pasted from Abifine Reader. Which the problem with that is when you paste it from Abifine Reader, you need to reformat it a lot. And what I've discovered is that CoTranslator AI is amazing at just with a pre-scripted prompt, which just says basically it's very simple. It says fix this text or fix its format, and then a few instructions on how like what goes where and where the new sentences should end and so on. But it's really simple. You can just say, fix this text, and that still will do most of the trick. You just select the text, you press the shortcut, and CoTranslator AI gives you the text formatted. And now all of a sudden, I just can take down anything, any form of the document, even images. I don't need to like even do expensive scanning and so on. Just you snap a photo of something with your phone and then you digitize it and you format it with the Abifine Reader and then CotranslatorAI, and you have a document which would take you normally 20 minutes to transcribe. You can do it in 2, and it's perfectly, perfectly transcribed. You do some small checks, obviously, on the personal identification numbers and so on, but basically the personal data you check, like the key data, and then everything else you just work in the window that you're working on. I just reformat like a magic brush. You just select the text and you just press the shortcut and it formats it. It's amazing, and you can do even tables because you can ask it to split it into tabs. Like any table would be split from the next column with a tab, and then you just select the text and you press the shortcut in Word to make a text a table. And then because Abifine Reader usually like you paste the table and it's not formatted properly, you have to fix the margins. You have but this just does it like off the cuff. Just anything, yeah. It's amazing. Also, something that because you asked about other use cases, is when I have an interview, I'm interviewing someone, somebody else interviewed someone, and I have the this is for the Bulgarian news agency, obviously. I have the interview, but it's not a very good quality audio file. There are some people talking in the background. It's been recorded with a potato, as I like to joke. It's not a very good quality recording. Then I put it in whatever, like TurboScribe or Alter or whatever, and I transcribe it. And it's still not good enough. I need to do a lot of manual selection and so on, but I can write my prompt with CoTranslator AI and like, this is the speaker, this is his name, he's talking about this topic. Here is a previous speech, or here's the article that we wrote, announcing that we're going to interview the speaker. Or here's like I'm pasting like a scientific work that they've done and they've published a paper on something and we're interviewing them. And then CoTranslator AI and ChatGPT in particular is very good at recovering the lost meaning. the words that are missing, or like, let's say it said something that is, it's a true word, it does exist, so spell check doesn't get it, but it's nonsensical in terms of it just heard something else. So I like to say, for example, that I have a contract for buying a cat. Usually it's a car, but if the cat tools, like, not the cat tool, sorry, the transcription tool gets it wrong, my spell check is not going to get it. And I might end up, if I'm not careful, publishing, information about a contract to buy a cat.
Mm,
And,
mm, mm.
and it's, but because ChatGPT knows through CoTranslator AI that it's about a car and about cars and the speaker they will fix it.
It'll
So
fix
it's like a
that.
super spell check. It's,
So
yeah.
even if it's going through a particular transcript, when it comes across words that just are phrases that don't make sense in the context of what you told it would be, it's
Yeah,
likely to fix that and make
almost 100%.
almost 100% even. Wow, that is interesting. I
I've
noticed
been testing it.
you said that, like, when you do OCR, that you clean up the OCR first using the AI in CoTranslator AI. My personal workflow has been that I skip that step. I have so I'm curious about your reaction to this. I have found that when I do OCR, even if it's pretty bad, I will still go straight to translation in most cases.
Oh,
And
really?
I find that I don't lose anything. I save a step. Whereas before, when I first started with AI and I was playing around with it, my first thought was, well, we're going to have to clean it up first with a first prompt, and then we'll translate it with a second one. Have you,
Right.
what's your feeling to that? Did you feel that going through the OCR first and then going to the translation second works better for you?
If I'm OCRing something for myself, absolutely, I will start using that. I learned something new today, which will save me
Oh,
time.
okay. Well,
But if I'm doing it for somebody else, then maybe I'm not inclined to give them the output because they might get confused because they don't know where this is coming from. So it's like
mm,
it's somebody else, and they might, just wonder like, what is this drivel, and you know what I mean. So depending on whether your workflow allows for it,
mm.
absolutely, I will try it tomorrow. I'll try it today if I have a translation.
All right, interesting.
uh,
Well, let me ask you one more question then, because this is kind of along the same lines of one and two. Because I have generally thought that going through translation, if with a good prompt, you should be able to get a good fluent translation straight up. But I have a number of students who are finding that in their personal experience that doing a translation step first and then having a second revision prompt second with explicit instructions for fluidity helps. And I remember trying that on a few workflows, and I saw where they were coming from. What's your feeling on that? Do you think that making the AI go through two steps is a better process in many cases, or do you think with a good prompt you can get it to do the whole thing?
the good prompt definitely helps. If your prompt is not good, then you have a lot more work to make the text appropriate. But I found that, and I even when we corresponded, I think I even told you that I found that the best results in certain situations come when I apply even the same prompt multiple times. So the way it works is you just instruct the AI to not just translate the text, but if it's already in that language, to elevate it. So it sounds a bit more fluid and more, let's say, natural sounding. So within the same prompt, because you already have the terminology there and everything, you just ask it to elevate it and you just repeat it with the same shortcut. So when I'm working on a text, I assign, my working prompt. Like I have a hotkey for the prompt that I'm currently working on, and just repeat the segments. And when you repeat the segments, then maybe you can go through another like linguistic prompt. Let's say, for example, improve the fluidity only. And then maybe you improve the fluidity and then you repeat the other prompt. And the results have been pretty good. It takes some time. So it's not like, it's not necessary for all the cases. But let's say you see that the text is complicated, sounds a bit clunky. Maybe it was clunky to begin with. The source text was not amazing. and then you just repeat the prompt, and then it smooths the edges, improves the wording, even the phrase order, and you know all the linguistic stuff that I want to get into. But then you just improve the readability. And yeah, sometimes some texts are very straightforward. You just do the prompt and then you edit it. And some
Mm.
texts you benefit from repeating the prompt or other prompts also on top of that. So revisions, you can even feed the prompt both the source text and the target text that you've already done, and it will check it and improve it further. But I've noticed that this helps definitely. On some texts, it's a mandatory step that I will always take. In some texts, you can skip it and just work off of your original prompt, and you don't need anything else.
It,
It.
I want to clarify and make sure I
Mhm.
exactly understood what you said. So you say you repeat the prompt, but if let's say you're translating Bulgarian to English, you run the prompt in the Bulgarian text, you get some English. How do you repeat the prompt now on the English? If you go back to the Bulgarian and you run it, but then it
No,
doesn't.
you just go to the English, and you just repeat the prompt on the English text. But you need to have pre-prompt. So if you say, well, I'm gonna translate the text from Bulgarian to English, and then I give it English text, it will say, okay, give me the Bulgarian text. Where is it?
Right, it'll be confused.
But yeah, but then when you write your prompt, you say, if the text is already in English,
Mm. Oh,
elevate it, and then use better phrasing, make sure the terminology is adhered to, and so on. And let's say it mostly would get the terminology even the first time. But I've
yeah.
noticed that sometimes, especially if you have longer, let's say, glossary prompts,
Hmm.
it will not get it completely right the first time. I've seen slippage, like not a lot, maybe like 2, 3, 4%, but
Yeah.
sometimes it slips. It just doesn't translate even though you gave it the term, just
Mm.
doesn't do it well because it's a long prompt. For example, like 700 entries. It's a lot of text, and
Wow, that's a lot.
yeah. So you repeat it, and then the
Mm.
next time usually it gets it right, and also the text is a bit more. It no longer sounds like translated text, if you know what I mean. It's still correct because you are applying the same rules, so it doesn't come up with other terms.
And
So
are you staying in the same context window when you do
yes,
this? Oh,
yes,
okay, so you're putting it into the ad hoc prompt field the second time.
yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow. Well, I just learned something new today too. I had never thought of that approach. Okay, so you've got a prompt that translates whatever,
But also elevates. Yeah.
and then it either elevates or translates based on the language that it's getting. You translate the
Mhm.
Bulgarian to English, then you put that English back into the ad hoc prompt field, run it again, and you get a better outcome with one single prompt. That's genius. That's really good. I hadn't thought of that one. Hadn't thought of
I
that at all.
found it. I found it by mistake because of using the shortcuts. I was repeating my prompt by mistake. Just I
Oh,
pressed the shortcut like
oh,
once, and then I instead of moving to the next one, I just pressed the shortcut again.
oh,
And then
and
it generated something, and I said, "What is that? Like, sounds a bit different than what I just saw." So I compared it, and like, there's a slight difference. The new
wow.
one sounded better. So I said, well, maybe if I just, I can check, see what it is. And then for some texts, it doesn't work. So for example, it makes, if you do it like 70 times, in the end, you're going to end up with a whole paragraph because it always tries to expand the text and so on. So it's not perfect,
Hmm.
but it gives you a better base sometimes to start editing because of course, you need your human input always. Like AI is, I don't think AI is going to completely replace translators because it doesn't work so well with context, and sometimes even culturally sensitive things are something that the AI just doesn't know. But it gives you a very good base to do your work faster so you can get paid faster. It's spend
Interesting.
less time, have more capacity to take jobs
Mm.
you know
Excellent. Well, let me ask you this then. Um, you know, what would you say to somebody starting out with CoTranslator AI as a translator for the first time? I have found that a lot of people get stuck. CoTranslator AI does have a reputation for being a difficult tool to use. And my feeling, well, I mean, the to learn this prompting, to make it efficient, to build it into a workflow, to get the logic of how the different fields work and all that. That's feedback I have heard. So a translator who comes along and takes up, for example, the free trial for a month and learns the basics, what would you recommend so that they don't get frustrated and decide that it's easier to just go back to ChatGPT?
Okay, so I have a few practical recommendations and then one which is like more, let's say, philosophical or general. So the practical recommendations are to, first of all, make the process as simple as possible in the beginning. So we are here going very technical about repeating prompts and like, workflows and prompts, writing prompts. But really, any simple thing that you can do and repeat enough times will give you improved efficiency so that it justifies the time you spend in the tool. It really does pay for itself, as I have said on multiple occasions in correspondence and on the forums and so on. The effort that you're spending, even on the very basic level, will pay for your increased usage of it in terms of pay. When I say pay, I mean in terms of time that you're spending. Just be consistent and keep using it. In the beginning, it will be like even the simplest workflow. Just ask just ask ChatGPT to translate, but through CoTranslator, it's just more convenient. So you don't have to search for the prompts or you don't have to type them always. You just have the prompt library. You used to learn the prompt library, and in that prompt library, just use the simplest prompts, like even just translate and then say, for example, just put two vocabulary words. Don't put like a whole, don't do a scripted workflow. Don't do like 700 entries. Just do two. Check what's happening. Check how much time it saves you. And then as time goes on, you will become, more well versed with the instrument, and then you would start understanding what Steven is saying in the more advanced courses and so on. When I started with CoTranslator, I almost dropped it in the beginning because I tried to like do the complex stuff and I wasn't able to. It wasn't. It was too complex, and I was like, no, this is not for me. I'm not good enough. Just Steven is like he's a genius. He's come up with this wonderful method, but this is not for me. But then I just said to myself, well, let's take it slow, step by step. And then over time, I started, being well versed and familiar with the instrument. And then I became able to innovate and do stuff. And then I've started learning and I started teaching other people to use it. So it's like it's a process. It's not, you can't expect to get everything possible from this tool like the first day or the first month. But what you can expect and what you will get is even if you use it for the very simple things, you would have improved speed of work and honestly quality. The quality of my work has improved. I've found because of the cognitive workload, which is reduced. I don't have to do. Have you tried, like, for example, doing 7 different things? Like when you're editing a text, but you're also like following a conversation and you're watching a TV show and something else. It's really tough. It's very demanding. CoTranslatorAI takes away some of my cognitive load. And even that, even if you're not using shortcuts, even if you're just copy pasting with the text, and even if you're just not even exporting the text from the cat tools, just working in Word documents, you will find some, if nothing else is, let's say, faster, then at least the cognitive workload will give you more bandwidth to think about your translation, to think about what you're doing. And then with time, mastery will come. Stephen has a very good course, which when I got the CoTranslator AI to use for the first time, the course wasn't even, I don't think it was available like in an official form. He had some recommendations and some instructions, and he was very like kind about sending information. But I don't think the AI, the Gate Workflow Mastery course was even out when I was a very early adopter. I think it was still in beta.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so yeah, while it was in beta and there wasn't so much resources, in the beginning, I almost quit it because I thought, oh my God, this is so complicated. But then like just now you have so much more and you give like, I'm pretty sure Steven has I haven't checked the beginner's courses because I'm no longer a beginner, but I'm pretty sure Steven has a beginner's course focused on getting the most out of it as a new user. And then as you go along, you just find your bearings, find your, you know what I mean? Just as you go, you become more proficient, and then someday you get to, tutor Steven on how to use his own tool.
That's right. No, I love learning new stuff, and I do, like I did today. In fact, at least two things, two really good things. Yeah. So you said you had a philosophical
Yeah.
suggestion also. What was that?
Like philosophical suggestion is basically, I mean, you can just anyone is free to not believe in what I'm saying, and I'm absolutely in agreement on why somebody would, not believe in this. But I found that if you, um, I mean, it's like it's a bit personal, but okay. I've always wanted to be a computer programmer. Like this used to be some of my, dream job, but I'm not good at writing machine language and so on. And so I couldn't be one, and that's okay. It's not for everybody. I'm a linguist. I'm very happy with it. And now with this tool, I can finally see that this is a way to actually do coding. Like I code. Yes, it's very rudimentary. I use text. I use my own language. I use English or Bulgarian or whatever. But I basically am learning to code. We're using Steven's tool, and you may not see it this way. This is my thing that I think this is why this technology is going to be so important, because it allows people to give instructions to machines using human language and not Java or whatever else. Like you don't have a barrier of entry. You
Mm,
don't need to learn like 7,000 different commands, and like, you just, this is breaks a barrier. I know it's a little bit philosophical and maybe a bit out there, so I don't want to imply that you need to be a coder to be able to use the tool. But that's how I feel. And
mm,
I've even, maybe you've seen I'm one of the people who left written feedback that Steven is using for CodeTranslator. I had the pleasure of a friend of mine who I gave instructions to use the tool. Uh, he said that he saw my testimony in writing on Steven's website.
oh,
And like I
good.
feel like I'm doing something right when I'm using CotranslatorAI. It's because it gives me not just the ability to write prompts, but basically just to basically program. I
Mm,
am now programming. I'm not just using Word or Excel. I'm just
mm,
like I'm creating my own scripts, and that's how I've been describing some of the things to other translators. Like, okay, you're not good at writing the scripts yet, but I need you to use AI for the jobs that I'm asking you to, because this will help you do it faster. And I'm not reducing their rates, by the way. I'm just giving them the tool, and I write their scripts for them, because
oh,
they don't, yeah, they're not as advanced. And
mm,
I write the script. I use and they just apply the script and translate the text, because I don't have all the time in the world. I'm very busy. I need to hire people from other languages also, because sometimes it's like German to Bulgarian. I'm not a German translator, so obviously I can't translate from German. But when I hire a German translator and I give them the tool and I give them the prompts, and so basically I've become like a little bit in my company, not just the, let's say, CEO, but
mm,
also like the main, I don't know, prompt engineer. And it's
mm,
really I feel like an engineer. I feel like a coder. I don't feel like a translator, just a translator anymore. It's
interesting.
elevated. Yeah.
No, that is fascinating. Do you write your prompts in English or primarily, or in Bulgarian primarily?
Both. If I'm translating something to the target language, I usually try to write it in the target language that I
Mm,
know. So, okay, for example, in French, I wouldn't write something in French. I would
mm,
write it in English also. But for some of the French translators, for example, they are translating to French, I write it in Bulgarian because they don't speak English. And
mm,
so they need to understand what the prompt is saying. Sometimes it's important to be able to read it. And so I write it in Bulgarian then. If I'm translating something to Bulgarian, I write the prompt in Bulgarian,
mm, mm, mm.
because this is my language combination. If I knew other languages, I'd probably write the prompt in that language. I think with time I can start writing it using the, CoTranslator AI functionality. I may start writing the prompts in other languages, but I'm not so sure yet that it will. I don't know what it says, so I mean, it requires linguistic mastery that I don't have. So
Yeah, I guess I think it makes sense to write the prompt, like as you say, in the target language because it already conditions the AI to have that language in its the front of its memory when it gets going. So there's probably a little bit of a boost. It's probably not huge, but there might be a little bit. But yeah, you
in
could use
Bulgarian,
your
it is a boost.
Oh, you definitely have noticed a boost. Okay, in writing them
It's
that
like
way.
5%, but
Yeah.
5% is not nothing.
Yeah, 5% sounds about right. And yeah, it's not nothing. That's correct. Then one last thing. You wrote me about a prompting approach that you use, smart actions, useful shortcuts or something where you actually get
Yeah.
the answer in line in the text. And you put your request into the text and then you run the prompt on that. I would think that would be messy. Why would you not? My feeling is I would want to get it out of the text and into the interface, the CoTranslator AI interface, so it's separate and neat. But you're doing it right there. What's the advantage and how does that work for you?
So let's say, for example, you have when you're translating documents, it's not marketing text, it's a little more specific. You need to describe all of the stamps, all of the signatures. So you have to write a lot. You have to write like a fixed round stamp by this notary public on this date and so on. You have a lot of signature illegible, and you just over and over and over, and you may not get it in the source text because you know that there is a signature there. So you just I write like a letter, press a shortcut combination, and it gives me the whole signature legible text. Okay, so it's like 15 characters typed. It's not so much, but then maybe I can take the notary name and make of that notary name and so on. I can make an English language stamp. So I don't need to type it every time. I need to put in. There's a lot of notary stamps on documents, Stephen. I can I can save I can save a lot of time. Just obviously we'll do it the first time and then we'll copy paste, but
Mhm.
why would you do that when you have a neater option? You can just like type like a specific command. So for example, I type stamp and then I select stamp and just press my shortcut and then it just generates the whole stamp.
Oh, you type
Uh,
stamp and then you run the shortcut and it pastes that over it.
yeah, and the reason why I do this is because I don't want to pre-format the other document. So maybe I'm just doing like site translation, if you know what I mean, just looking at the document and just putting the text in. Yeah, I can definitely save some time like this because I know that the stamp I need to describe right in the text, but I don't need to like do it in Bulgarian so I can then translate it with CoTranslator. I can just, you know, stamp is like 5 keystrokes and then a shortcut instead of every time like, and you can create even, let's say I put in um, somebody's name, personal identification number, date of birth, parents, and so on. This is information that I can get from the OCR. And I can just press a shortcut combination and generates me a birth certificate translated.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because these are blank types of documents, they are the same.
Hmm.
So it's not the different documents, it's the same document, just different people have different, personal details. And because of using CoTranslator AI, I'm not typing it in ChatGPT. Using the
Mm.
API, the data is protected.
Yeah.
So I can actually even do personal documents, which I would not normally be able to use in with ChatGPT because it's confidentiality breach and you would be liable. But this way, through the API, you're not sending anything like it's all encrypted and then different boxes. Let's say it doesn't. There is no like your profile leaked and everything you typed in it was like. Sometimes it happens, privacy breach, and this is like just using the API, you can just process even personal data. I know it's like off the question you asked me, but yeah, you can anything that's repetitive, the same way I generate the weather articles, I just put in you know, so it's in effect the weather article prompt is that. It's just a very
Mm-hmm.
specific case. And then you have some more general cases. For example, like I don't know, breaking down text into paragraphs, collating text. So, for example, I select a paragraph of Bulgarian text, like not like 5 paragraphs of Bulgarian text, and then 5 paragraphs of the translation in English, and I want them to be one after the other because I need to, look them
Oh,
up.
oh, you want them
Yeah, collating.
Bulgarian English like that.
Yeah, exactly, and I can do that with CoTranslator. I have a shortcut. It's called COL. Like that. That's what I've named it. But
Hmm.
basically, I can write a prompt where I ask CoTranslator to execute commands, and if I remember the commands, or I can look them in the CoTranslator window, I
How
can
do you keep
do.
track of all these shortcuts? Do you have? I mean, I have a system. I have a table that I've listed
Mhm.
them all out on. What is your method for keeping track of so many shortcuts?
I sometimes I reassign them. So when I'm working on something that requires me to have certain shortcuts, I just go and remap.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't have the same shortcuts for every job. Like bigger jobs, especially, I would remap. And I'm always using, let's say, Control Shift and 1 for, let's say the main anchor prompt, then Control Shift plus 2 for some, slight linguistic improvements, Control Shift plus 3 for like something else, and then you just remap. And then when you no longer use the prompt, I don't delete them because I may get, especially repeat clients, I
Hmm.
just keep them in my library. I just remove the shortcuts from them, and then
Oh,
I remap. And
okay.
I have like a folders of clients. So I keep the prompts that I'm using for certain clients because they usually give me similar texts. And when I start working on this client, I just remap my shortcuts to these prompts, and then I do the other thing. You can't keep all of your prompts with shortcuts. It's not possible. There's way too many prompts. Like I have maybe 200 prompts at this
Mm.
point. And some
Right.
of them I don't use much, but
Hmm.
I use them once a year and then I don't use them for a year, but I have
Mm.
them and I don't need to write them again. I already have done the work, and CotranslatorAI is amazing as a library because actually you can use Windows to even search keywords and so on. With the proper naming of the folders, you can just like, okay, I go to my client. This is my client. This is the language pair. This is the prompt that I used last time. Is it similar? Maybe I can do a few adjustments on that. But this definitely, like, the mapping doesn't work if you just map everything. It will run out of shortcut combinations. End of memory.
Mm.
I just remap to like the 4 or 5 most used ones, and then for the next job I remap again.
Interesting. Okay, so that I mean that's a great method as well. So each job you assign shortcuts for that job, and then when you're done with it, you move them out. Do you use the tabs a lot?
I do. Um, when I'm working in a cat tool and not outside of a cat tool, so with no exported document, I basically, let's say, take the whole like bunch of text from the cat tool and I copy it into one tab and I do something with it, and then I open another tab to run the other prompt. Because if I do shortcuts, um, because I'm not working directly into Word, it doesn't paste it.
Mm.
It just stays within the context window, and then it's a bit tough to switch the prompts if you have the same context window. So instead, I use the tabs. I take one of the tabs. So this is a very specific use case. So if I'm working on like the gate workflow where I export the file and I'm writing directly into the file, then I don't use the tabs so much. But if I'm working on, let's say, something in a cat tool and I can't copy paste directly, then definitely I'm using the tabs because
Okay.
then it makes it easier. So it's been helpful, but for me it's like niche cases. It's not I would not use the tabs every time. But when I
Oh,
do use them, they are very helpful.
interesting. Yeah, I mean I've had users ask me why we limit it to 10 because they would like to be able to have 20, 30, 40 tabs open. And that doesn't match my workflow at all. But I mean, I
Mm.
respect that people would have a different workflow. But yeah, it surprises me to hear, all the different ways that, users adapt to the way they like to work. So, yeah.
That's a good thing. Yeah, you can. I was able to learn to adapt it because CoTranslator has the tabbed option. If it
Mm.
didn't, then I would have to adapt using another method, which would probably be slower and less effective. So
Hmm.
anything is a tool, like especially a good tool such as this one, having the option. Maybe you're not even using the option at this point. Maybe a year later you would actually. Maybe we're going to be here in a year talking about how the tabbed version of CoTranslator is like the best thing since sliced bread because there's a new workflow which allows like for very efficient use. Right now, I don't think it's like the most important feature, but the fact
Mm.
that it's there, maybe in the future the workflow will change again, and
Exactly.
then maybe this will be the best.
Right. Well, good. Well, that gets me through the questions that I had and the things I wanted to discuss. I really appreciate you sharing this time. We've been talking for a while. Any last things you want to share before that I might have missed?
Let me see. Yeah, I can share a few more things. So I'm except for translator and journalist, I'm also an interpreter, which I know it sounds like how many things are you, like, what the hell are you doing? But this is, as I said, small market, so you have to learn like a lot of things. And I use a CoTranslator for interpreting preparation
Do
as
you?
well.
Yeah, well, actually, I am very curious about this because I'm not an interpreter and I have not been able to imagine what an interpreter would find the tool useful for. So please expand on that.
Because it allows me to work in any software, including, let's say, even it allows me to work in PDFs. So for example, the client sends me their presentation on either a slide deck on PowerPoint or a PDF. And of course, as an interpreter, you would ideally want to receive the materials for the presentation, I don't know, 2 weeks in advance, ideally even a month in advance, especially if it's like a scientific conference. But sometimes, and this is unfortunately very often the case, you get it last minute. And when you get it last minute, there's not much you can do with it because, well, it's last minute and you have 70 things to prepare and so on. But then, you start the translation, the interpreting, I mean, and then your booth mate is helping you ideally with some numbers and so on. But in the, like, in the booth, you can't really type, right? So you just can't start typing because you can hear it in the microphone. But you can map your silent mouse to certain CoTranslator AI shortcuts. And
Okay.
so, for example, I got the materials last minute. I have a speech. They gave it to me 5 minutes before I started. I don't have time to translate it, but I can do a very possible job. And I can't type in the booth again. Remember, so it's very important. So if I could type, for example, I could do the regular CoTranslator AI workflow and translate the text, but I can't. But with my silent mouse and my buttons that I can remap to basically remap your buttons to perform the shortcut for the CoTranslator AI. This happens in Windows. It doesn't happen in CoTranslator. So CoTranslator doesn't allow you, I think, to have a shortcut where you click the mouse. But if you remap smart actions on Logitech, for example, allows you to do that, but also some power toys and so on. I know this is a bit more advanced, but I'm pretty sure interpreters will get it, and that's why I'm spending the time to say it. Let's say you can remap your left scroll button, not like the scroll in the middle, but like the scroll buttons to perform a simple prompt just to translate the text, even like basic translation. Because when you're interpreting, of course, like you you would like ideally the materials in advance so you can translate them and you can look at them and so on. But even like, let's say I get the presentation last minute, I can be very, it would help me a lot if I can just translate it using CoTranslator with those shortcuts. I just go into the text box with, like, let's say the descriptions, I translate it, and then I can see both the original text because this is how I made my prompt, and then I can see CoTranslator's output in the other language. So I don't have to
Oh.
think about everything. Sometimes maybe it will not get the terms right because, as I said, you don't have the time to prompt in advance. You got the materials last minute. But I can get a very decent, I can even do it as I am interpreting because it doesn't require me to think. I just press a button. Select the text, press the button, get it in both languages. You can do slide decks, it's easier, but even you can do comments on PDFs. So for example, I get a PDF, I cannot edit the PDF, or even if I can, it's like complex. So I just open a new comment and I just copy paste the text, with the workflow, with the shortcut that I'm not going to use the keyboard to type. And then I just get like a comment on the PDF. And then from this comment, maybe I can like figure something out. It helps me, it facilitates my work, especially with some more complex terminology. It, CoTranslator AI is doing a very, ChatGPT, I mean, I have to
Yeah.
say, is doing a very decent job at translating complex terms. So like it's, let's say chemistry. I will not know all the compound names, but ChatGPT does.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very good at translating them into another language. So I don't have to think about the compounds. I can just get them. My colleague can get them for me. Even I can do it myself with just those shortcuts. So it's not like it's a very niche thing, and it's not. But because you can do it with the silent mouse, you don't make noise, so it's not unprofessional. You're using the computer anyway to look at the presentations. So clients can't even tell that you're doing it, but they can definitely tell when you're interpreting, all the chemical compounds correctly or all the like electrical, because I'm very technical minded. interpreter. When I do interpret, it's like technical stuff, and it's very helpful. Niche cases, sometimes it works. Sometimes you get the materials in advance and you don't need it. But honestly, even for creating glossaries, which is like the basic thing, you just create your glossary, you feed in the information to CotranslatorAI, you pre-prompt it to create a glossary for you, and then you just paste this glossary to Boothmate or to somewhere else, or just import the file, and it speeds up your process. So yeah, this has been helpful as an interpreter also. I know it's a little bit niche case, and like, to some people, remapping mouse buttons and so on, it's like a little bit of a, fairy tale story. But the people who are working in this field would understand me.
Right, right. Very interesting. Okay, so I'm glad to hear about a use case like that. Anything else that comes to mind at this point?
Yeah, of course, I already told you I can speak about this all day, but my correspondence with clients, I use it for that. You put in the client's email, you write the prompt in advance, and you can respond to their query in, like, you have minimum, because I put in my rates also in the prompt.
Hmm.
So it's easier. Like this, you're quoting for, like, for example, 10 pages. It writes a very neat text, which is scripted. Yes, it's the same text every time. We're just like changing the numbers and so on. But why do I need to type every time I need to create an offer? Why do I need to type like all of the words, like hello, greetings, thank you so much for your, like, this would cost you that much and the deadline is this date. My prompt is like, I can input the price, I can play around with the deadlines. But yeah, I can use I use it for my correspondence. When I am about to post something on LinkedIn, I always like smooth out the text using CoTranslator AI, even in the LinkedIn window.
Oh,
Just like,
when you're posting comments online, you say?
yeah, no, it's anything. It's text. So
Yeah,
anything you would use a text for, you can use CoTranslator AI for.
right.
Uh, Yeah, of course, translation, yes, it's the most powerful thing and so on. But yeah, even if you're posting a comment, in English, yeah, I'm proficient with it, but it's not my native language. I might get something wrong. My wording can be a bit awkward. Maybe even now, as I'm speaking, I'm using some, I don't know. I'm trying to be like not so much self-conscious, but and then before I can even like say, okay, fix this my text for social media to make it a bit more understandable, maybe not so technical, and it does a very passable job at this also. So it's like
Hmm.
my assistant. It does everything for me. Like, it's a giant super. I call it like my giant super brush. Like, it's
Hmm.
super spell check, super context check, super, like, whatever. You can just use it to write anything you need to write. Um, Heck, you can write a love letter if you want to. Like,
Sure,
you know, you
absolutely.
can do anything you can do with ChatGPT, but you don't need to, like, because it's very distracting. Like, alt and tabbing all the time. We've already spoken about this. It's just you take the text where it is. You just, you can,
Act
you
on it
know,
right in place rather than having to move it off and
yeah,
back.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I use it to write commands in my text. I don't write commands in ChatGPT anymore, or even in CoTranslator. Sometimes I don't. I just write them in Word. So
Hmm.
improve this text. Replace this word everywhere in all instances of this word with the other word in text in MS Word, and then I just execute the prompt which says execute the command. Like, this is a very simple prompt. Just I already have given the command in Word, and I just have the prompt where it says execute the command, and it executes it, and it replaces all instances of contract with agreement, for example, in the whole
Oh,
selected text.
won't it change some other stuff while it's doing that though? I mean,
No,
don't you?
no, no,
Oh,
no.
you don't have haven't
Do
noticed
you
something.
know how I know? Because I'm looking at the text the whole time,
Hmm.
and I can even, like, okay, I'm not like copying 70 pages, obviously. I'm
Hmm.
copying a page.
Hmm.
And in that page, I can clearly see that everything else is the same. I can just see it the moment it pastes it. I can
Hmm.
see the shape of the lines is the same and so on. It's just, it doesn't change anything. If you say change nothing, only do this, only execute the command, it doesn't change anything.
And why would you use global find and replace in with the AI when you could do global find and replace in Word?
Because global find and replace doesn't comply with changes in gender. And unlike English, which is a genderless language, Bulgarian is gendered. And so, for example, I'm changing a word with another term which is in feminine, not masculine. And now it's a problem.
It is.
However, with the right prompt, I change not just the term, but I also change all the words around the term, and it happens like 99.9% accuracy.
Wow. Okay. Fine.
Find replace doesn't do that for you.
You're right. It doesn't. I mean, I'm sure it gets capitalization done right as well. Whereas
absolutely, you can ask it anything.
It's more.
You can do capitalization. You can you can basically remove capitalization if you. Okay, so your contracts is the thing that I translate most often. So in contracts, you have capitalization in English, but in Bulgarian, not many of those terms would be capitalized. It's not like lawyers have, like they say, well, you can, but mostly it shouldn't. And I haven't seen any other tool that deals with capitalization well.
Okay, interesting.
But CoTranslator does. If you instruct it to, absolutely does. You just have to tell it. Like that's the funny thing. Anything you can tell this tool anything, and it will do it for you. As long as it's simple. Like, okay, if I tell it to do 700 things, it will probably not manage because it's like 700 things. But then if you break down your workflow in simple steps, you basically get to do it for you.
Okay, that's interesting too. Well, thank you very much. I'll tell you what, we have been talking for a while, so I will bring it to an end. But you have really covered a lot of good information all around. I really appreciate your time.